Story number 1. Echoes of Fort Ord. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the abandoned expanse of Fort Ord. Once a bustling military training ground during World War II, the base had been deserted since its closure in 1994. Now, nature had begun to reclaim the sprawling grounds, with ivy crawling up the remnants of barracks and the echo of forgotten footsteps lingering in the cold, silent air. My name is David Harris, a freelance filmmaker with a passion for uncovering the hidden stories of forgotten places. Armed with my camera and an insatiable curiosity, I decided to explore Fort Ord, hoping to create a documentary that would shed light on the mysteries shrouding the old military base. Little did I know, some secrets were meant to remain buried. The drive to Fort Ord was uneventful, the roads cleared despite the late hour. As I approached the perimeter, the towering fences and barbed wire barriers loomed ominously against the twilight sky. I parked my van at the edge of the property, taking a moment to gather my thoughts before stepping into the unknown. The main gate creaked as I pushed it open, the sound slicing through the evening stillness. My flashlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the overgrown pathways and dilapidated buildings that stood as silent sentinels of a bygone era. I began my exploration, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of fallen leaves and snow that blanketed the ground. As I navigated through the maze of barracks and administrative buildings, a sense of unease settled over me. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and every creak and groan of the old structures seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. My camera captured every detail, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed as I delved deeper into the heart of Fort Ord, documenting the remnants of training grounds, armories, and officers' quarters. It was in one of the older buildings, a former dormitories turned barracks, that I first heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing from the upper floors. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering between courage and fear. No response. The footsteps continued, growing louder and more distinct, as if someone, or something, was ascending the stairs towards me. Summoning every ounce of bravery, I followed the sound, my flashlight beam dancing across peeling paint and broken windows. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step a testament to the building's fragile state. As I reached the top floor, the footsteps ceased, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I entered a long, narrow corridor lined with dorm rooms, each door hanging ajar, revealing empty beds and scattered belongings. The temperature seemed to drop, my breath visible in the frigid air. As I moved down the hallway, a sudden gust of wind slammed one of the doors shut, startling me. My heart raced as I turned to face the source of the disturbance, but there was nothing, only the flickering light of my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. Pushing forward, I entered one of the rooms, the door creaking ominously behind me. Inside, the walls were covered in claw marks, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. In the corner of the room stood an old wooden desk, papers strewn across its surface. I approached cautiously, my hands shaking as I reached for a flashlight to better inspect the room. That's when I saw it, a faded photograph of a young soldier, his eyes hauntingly familiar. Below the image, scrawled in desperate handwriting, were the words, "Help me." A chill ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and the room was plunged into an icy darkness. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in pitch black. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my backup light, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from the hallway. A cold, hollow voice whispered my name, sending shivers down my spine. David. David Harris. I spun around, the flashlight finally coming back to life, revealing a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room. Its eyes glowed a faint, unnatural red, and its form was distorted, blending human and something far more sinister. I froze, unable to move or speak, as the entity began to move towards me, its footsteps echoing ominously. "Why are you here?" the voice demanded, now louder and more insistent. I came to document Fort Ord," I stammered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to intrude." The figure stopped just inches from me, its breath visible in the frigid air. "This place is haunted by the souls trapped here by war and betrayal. Leave now, or you will join us." Summoning every ounce of courage, I backed away slowly, my mind racing for a way out. But the room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing closer, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Desperate, I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, sealing me inside. The entity advanced, its presence overwhelming, as the room began to distort and warp, memories of war and loss flooding my mind. I saw visions of soldiers lost in battle, their screams echoing through the halls, their spirits forever bound to the grounds of Fort Ord. Tears streamed down my face as the realization hit me. I had trespassed into a place of immense sorrow and unresolved pain. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't know." The figure paused, its eyes softening slightly. "Understanding is the first step to release. Help us remember and honor those who were lost." In that moment, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a sense of peace beginning to replace the terror. The entity faded, its presence diminishing as the memories of the past were acknowledged and respected. The room grew warmer, the oppressive weight lifting, and the door to the hallway creaked open once more. Breathing heavily, I stumbled out of the room, my mind reeling from the encounter. The rest of the exploration felt different, less ominous, more serene, as if the spirits had acknowledged my presence and allowed me to leave with their stories intact. As dawn broke, casting a golden light over the abandoned base, I made my way back to my van, the camera in hand. The footage I had captured would later reveal glimpses of the shadowy figure and the haunting eyes that had locked onto mine, but those moments were fleeting, almost too quick to be real. Driving away from Fort Ord, I felt a deep sense of respect for the souls that still lingered, their stories a poignant reminder of the cost of war and the importance of remembering those who had been lost. The abandoned base stood silent behind me, but its echoes would forever resonate in my heart and mind. Back in the safety of my home, I compiled the footage, editing together the haunting visuals and my narrative of the night's events. The documentary, titled Echoes of Fort Ord, aimed to honor the memories of those who had perished and to shed light on the lingering spirits that haunted the desolate grounds. Upon its release, the film garnered attention from both skeptics and believers, sparking discussions about the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the unresolved traumas that can bind souls to specific places. Some viewers reported experiencing chills and eerie sensations while watching the footage, as if the spirits of Fort Ord were reaching out through the screen. For me, the experience at Fort Ord was a profound lesson in humility and empathy. It taught me that some places hold stories that go beyond the physical realm, stories that demand to be heard and respected. The haunted grounds of Fort Ord were a testament to the enduring human spirit, even in death, seeking peace and recognition. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the memories remain vivid, a haunting reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. Whenever I pass by Fort Ord, now further reclaimed by nature, I feel a connection to the spirits that once roamed its grounds, their whispers carried on the wind, forever echoing the tales of war, loss, and the quest for peace. And sometimes, when the night is particularly silent and the moon casts long shadows across the abandoned buildings, I swear I can still hear the distant footsteps and the mournful call of the lost souls of Fort Ord, reminding us all to remember and honor those who came before. Story number 2. Whispers of Fort Monroe. The autumn air in Virginia carried a chill that seemed to seep into every crevice of Fort Monroe, one of America's oldest military forts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the historic grounds, I, Emily Carter, found myself alone in the museum that now occupied the former military barracks. My job as a night shift museum employee was both solitary and serene, surrounded by relics of a bygone era. Yet, on this particular night, an unsettling presence loomed over the fortress, one that would forever change my perception of the past and the spirits that lingered within these walls. Fort Monroe had always been a place of fascination for me. The rich history, the tales of soldiers and prisoners, and the sheer magnitude of the structure drew countless visitors each year. But beyond the tours and exhibitions, locals whispered about the hauntings, stories of restless spirits unable to find peace. Skeptical by nature, I had always dismissed these as mere folklore. That is, until tonight. It was nearing midnight when I began my routine inspection of the exhibition rooms. The museum was dimly lit, with only the soft glow of the display lights highlighting artifacts and memorabilia. I moved from one exhibit to another, ensuring everything was in order, when suddenly, the lights in the Civil War exhibit flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. "Not again," I muttered, reaching for the flashlight strapped to my belt. The sudden blackout was disorienting, but I reminded myself that electrical issues were not uncommon in these old buildings. As I fumbled with the flashlight, a cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and something more acrid, a metallic tang that made my skin crawl. Just as I managed to restore some light, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing from behind me. They were steady, deliberate, yet there was something unnerving about their rhythm. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. The room was empty, save for the exhibits and the shadows dancing on the walls. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering between authority and fear. The only response was the distant howl of the wind outside and the creaking of the old building settling for the night. Shaking off the unease, I turned back to my inspection, but the footsteps had stopped. I continued my work, trying to focus on the artifacts before me. It wasn't until I returned to my desk that I saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the courtyard, just beyond the glass doors. It was dressed in a Union Army uniform, the fabric faded and torn, blending seamlessly with the darkness around it. The figure's face was obscured, but its eyes glowed a faint, unnatural red, fixed intently on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the apparition. It extended a hand, pointing towards an old, ornate coffin displayed in the center of the room. "Don't forget us," the figure seemed to whisper, though no sound emanated from its form. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I approached the coffin, the temperature in the room dropping noticeably. The air was thick with an oppressive presence, as if the very walls were closing in on me. The coffin was intricately carved, the wood aged and weathered, yet it looked as if it had just been sealed. Inside, instead of the lifeless body one might expect, there was nothing, only an empty space that seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. As I reached out to touch the lid, the room plunged into darkness once more. The howling wind outside intensified, and the footsteps returned, louder and more frantic this time. Panic surged through me as I backed away, my flashlight flickering wildly before dying completely. In the darkness, I could feel the presence of the spirits, restless, tormented, and desperate for recognition. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open, and the shadowy figure reappeared, its form more defined and menacing. "Run," it seemed to say, pointing towards the exit. But before I could move, a force pulled me towards the coffin, the air thick with the scent of decay and sorrow. "Why?" I managed to gasp, struggling against the invisible grip. "Why are you here?" The figure stepped closer, its eyes burning brighter, reflecting the torment of the souls it represented. "We were forgotten," it whispered, the sound echoing in my mind. "Remember us." With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from the invisible hold, stumbling back and tripping over my own feet. The flashlight flickered back to life, revealing the figure once more before it dissipated into the shadows, leaving me alone in the now silent room. Breathing heavily, I gathered my composure and tried to rationalize what had just happened. Ghosts, I thought. It must be the isolation, the old buildings. But deep down, I knew there was something more, something that demanded to be acknowledged and remembered. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of Fort Monroe, spending hours poring over old records and talking to the few remaining residents who had lived there before it became a historical site. What I discovered was a haunting tale of loss and betrayal during the Civil War. The fort had been a site of countless deaths, not just of soldiers but also of prisoners of war who had been subjected to unimaginable horrors. Their spirits, it seemed, were still bound to the land, seeking recognition and remembrance for the suffering they had endured. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the museum with a newfound purpose. I decided to create a special exhibition dedicated to the forgotten souls of Fort Monroe, ensuring that their stories would be told and their memories preserved. As I worked on the exhibit, the haunting presence seemed to grow stronger, the spirits acknowledging my efforts and their longing for remembrance. One evening, as I was arranging artifacts, the lights flickered once more, and the footsteps returned, this time leading me to a secluded part of the museum. There, hidden behind a stack of old crates, I found an old, dust-covered chest. Intrigued, I opened it to reveal a collection of personal items, letters, photographs, and small mementos that belonged to the soldiers and prisoners who had perished at Fort Monroe. As I sifted through the contents, I came across a diary belonging to a young soldier named Thomas Green. His entries detailed the brutal conditions, the camaraderie among the men, and the despair of being forgotten by history. His final entry was a desperate plea for someone to remember their sacrifice and ensure their stories were not lost to time. Moved by his words, I realized the true extent of the spirit's anguish. It wasn't just about being forgotten, it was about being acknowledged and honored. I decided to incorporate Thomas Green's story prominently in the exhibition, adding a personal touch that would resonate with visitors and bring the past to life. The night I finished the exhibition, I felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a lingering unease. As I walked through the newly curated displays, the room felt warmer, the oppressive energy replaced by a calm that suggested the spirits were finally finding peace. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a small note tucked into one of the displays, Thomas Green's final entry, copied neatly by hand, "Thank you for remembering us." A sense of relief washed over me as I realized that my efforts had made a difference. The spirits of Fort Monroe were no longer lost in the shadows, their stories were now part of the living history of the fort, honored and preserved for future generations. But even as the night settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that some spirits never truly leave, that their presence lingers as a reminder of the past and the importance of remembrance. Occasionally, I still hear faint footsteps echoing through the halls of the museum, a silent tribute to the souls who had finally been acknowledged. Fort Monroe stands as a testament to resilience and memory, its walls no longer silent but filled with the whispers of those who came before us. And as I continue my work, I carry with me the stories of the forgotten, ensuring that their voices remain heard, their sacrifices never forgotten. Yet, every so often, when the wind howls through the old fort and the moon casts eerie shadows on the snow-covered grounds, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing in the courtyard, watching over the museum with a silent vigilance. It's a comforting presence, a guardian ensuring that the balance between the living and the dead remains undisturbed, a reminder that history is not just about the past, but also about how we choose to remember and honor it. And so, the whispers of Fort Monroe continue to echo through its halls, a haunting yet beautiful symphony of memory and acknowledgement, forever intertwined in the fabric of this historic fortress. Story number 3. Shadows of Fort Hancock. The night air was unusually crisp as I stood at the edge of Fort Hancock, the abandoned coastal fortress looming ominously against the darkened New Jersey shoreline. My name is Jake Matthews, and what was supposed to be an exhilarating adventure with my friends had quickly spiraled into a nightmare I could scarcely comprehend. Fort Hancock had always been a place of fascination for us, a relic of wartime history, now a playground for thrill-seekers and urban explorers. Little did we know, some places are meant to remain untouched, their secrets better left in the shadows. It was a chilly October evening when Tom, Mike, Sarah, and I decided to explore the infamous fort. The plan was simple: document our journey through the old tunnels, capture footage of the eerie structures, and perhaps even catch a glimpse of the rumored strange creatures that supposedly roamed the abandoned grounds. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of camaraderie, we ventured into the heart of Fort Hancock, the setting sun casting long, ghostly shadows over the decaying buildings. As we navigated the narrow pathways between crumbling barracks and rusted artillery, the silence was almost deafening. The only sounds were our footsteps crunching on the gravel and the distant crash of waves against the rocky shore. The fort, once a bustling hub of military activity, now stood silent and forlorn, nature slowly reclaiming its territory. We entered one of the main tunnels, the air thick with the scent of damp concrete and decaying wood. Our flashlights illuminated graffiti etched into the walls by previous explorers, their messages long forgotten. "Man, this place is straight out of a horror movie," Mike remarked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Sarah laughed nervously. "Yeah, well, if it's as creepy as it looks, we're in for a treat." We pressed deeper into the tunnel system, the walls narrowing and the ceiling dropping lower. The darkness seemed to press in around us, the beam of our flashlights casting long, wavering shadows. It wasn't long before we reached a particularly narrow passageway, the walls slick with moisture and the ground uneven underfoot. "Let's set up the camera here," Tom suggested, placing a tripod in the center of the passage. "This spot has a good view of the tunnel entrance." As I adjusted the camera, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, and an oppressive silence settled over us. Then, out of nowhere, we heard it, a low, guttural growl that resonated through the tunnel. It was unlike anything we had heard before, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Did you guys hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike nodded, his face pale. Yeah, sounds like something's down here with us. Sarah and Tom exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado wavering. The growling continued, growing louder and more distinct, as if the creature was drawing closer. Our flashlights flickered, casting erratic beams of light that danced on the walls. Maybe it's just a wild animal, Tom suggested, trying to sound reassuring. Wolves are common around here. But as we stood there, the growling transformed into something more ominous, a series of sharp, deliberate noises that resembled footsteps moving towards us. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the tunnel, my flashlight beam darting around in search of the source. Then, through the haze of fear and confusion, I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form gaunt and emaciated, yet disturbingly humanoid. Its eyes glowed a sinister yellow, piercing through the gloom with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The creature moved on all fours, its limbs elongated and thin, giving it an almost skeletal appearance. As it crawled towards us, I could see its skin stretched tightly over its bones, a patchwork of scars and sores that hinted at a tragic and tortured existence. Run! Mike screamed, pushing us towards the tunnel exit. Panic surged through me as we scrambled to our feet, the camera clattering to the ground in our haste. The creature let out a horrifying shriek, a sound that echoed off the walls and reverberated in my ears, fueling our desperation to escape. We sprinted down the tunnel, our breaths coming in short, ragged gasps as we navigated the maze-like passages. The creature was relentless, its growls and screams echoing behind us, a constant reminder that we were being hunted. I could hear Sarah's footsteps faltering, the sound of her collapsing into the darkness a stark contrast to the frantic pace of the rest of us. "Sarah!" I shouted, but there was no response, only the haunting silence of the tunnel and the distant sounds of our own footsteps. My heart ached with fear and worry as I pushed myself to keep moving, the image of her stumbling and disappearing behind me burned into my mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we burst out of the tunnel into the cold night air, the full moon casting a silvery glow over the deserted fort. The ground was covered in a thick layer of snow, making our escape even more treacherous. As we stumbled into the open, the creature's howls echoed through the night, a terrifying symphony that lingered in the air long after it had disappeared into the darkness. Breathing heavily, we looked back at the entrance of the tunnel, our hearts still racing. "We need to get out of here," Mike said, his voice trembling with fear. "Now." We hurried towards the parking lot, the howls of the creature still haunting our ears. But as we reached the edge of the fort, something even more chilling awaited us. Large, strange footprints were etched into the snow, their size and shape unlike any animal we had encountered. The tracks led away from the fort, disappearing into the dense forest beyond. "What the hell are those?" I whispered, staring at the tracks in disbelief. Tom knelt down to examine them more closely. "These are huge, way bigger than any wolf. And they look almost human." Before we could process what we were seeing, the vehicle alarms began to blare from behind us, the sound cutting through the night like a knife. We turned to see another group of explorers approaching, their flashlights sweeping the area in a frantic search. "Come on, guys," Tom urged, gesturing towards the road. "Let's go." We piled into the van, the camera still on the floor beside us, capturing the last vestiges of our terrifying encounter. As we drove away, the forest seemed to close in around us, the shadows lengthening and the sounds of the night growing louder. But no matter how far we went, the feeling of being watched lingered, an invisible presence that haunted our journey. Just as we thought we were finally escaping, the van's GPS began to malfunction, rerouting us back to the very entrance of Fort Hancock. "That's weird," Mike muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "We should have passed this place hours ago." I tried to override the system, but the GPS stubbornly insisted on taking us back. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, looping us back into the heart of the forest. Panic set in as we realized we were caught in some kind of supernatural trap, unable to break free from the fort's malevolent grip. Suddenly, our van was jolted by a massive impact. We slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt as smoke billowed from the engine. The vehicle had been flipped on its side, the front of the van embedded in a large oak tree. We were stranded, the darkness pressing in around us as the shadows deepened. "Is anyone out there?" Sarah called into the night, her voice trembling. The only response was the eerie silence of the forest, broken only by the distant howls that seemed to grow louder, more frequent. As we attempted to assess the damage, the rearview mirror caught my eye, and my blood ran cold. Standing in the reflection was the creature, its hollow eyes staring directly at us. It was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We need to get out of here," I urged, trying to keep my voice steady despite the terror gripping me. But as we tried to open the doors, they wouldn't budge. The locks were jammed, the windows sealed tight against the onslaught of the night. We were trapped, with the creature drawing ever closer, its presence a suffocating force that threatened to engulf us. Desperation mounting, we decided to abandon the van and make a run for it, hoping to find shelter in the deeper woods. As we sprinted through the forest, the shadows seemed to come alive, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes, the path ahead obscured by darkness. The howls echoed all around us, the creature's pursuit relentless. "Run faster!" Mike shouted, his breath ragged and panic-stricken. But no matter how fast we ran, the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, the trees closing in around us like the jaws of a predator. My legs burned with exhaustion, my lungs gasping for air as fear fueled every step. In the distance, I saw a faint light flickering through the trees, an old ranger station, perhaps our only hope for salvation. We pushed forward, the light growing brighter as we neared it. But as we approached, the realization hit us, we were not alone. The ranger station stood silent and abandoned, its windows dark and foreboding. The door creaked open with a gust of wind, revealing a dark, empty interior. "We have to go," Sarah whispered, gripping my arm tightly. "This place feels wrong." But as we turned to flee, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. The temperature dropped suddenly, frost forming on the windows as the shadows from the forest seeped into the building. The creature stood at the far end of the room, its presence filling the space with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, trying to muster the courage to face the creature. The creature let out a guttural growl, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence. "You trespass on sacred ground. Leave now, or suffer the consequences." Desperation drove us to search for an escape, but every door and window led us deeper into the station's maze-like corridors. The shadows twisted and turned, the forest's dark magic keeping us trapped within the ranger station's walls. As fear reached its peak, Mike remembered an old story he had heard about the creature, a being that guarded the forest, punishing those who disturbed its peace. The only way to appease it was to respect the land and leave without taking anything from the forest. With trembling hands, I reached out to the creature. We didn't mean to intrude. We just wanted to enjoy the beauty of the forest. "Please, let us go." The creature's eyes softened slightly, the anger momentarily giving way to a sorrowful understanding. "You have seen what lies beyond. Learn from this and respect the boundaries of the natural world." The oppressive darkness began to lift, the shadows retreating as the creature stepped back, its form becoming less menacing. The ranger station doors swung open, revealing the first light of dawn breaking through the horizon. Exhausted and shaken, we stepped outside, the morning sun warming our chilled bodies. The forest around us seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the malevolent energy dissipating with the first rays of sunlight. As we made our way back to our campsite, the forest felt different, quieter, more respectful of our presence. The legends of the creature were no longer just stories, they were warnings to honor and protect the wilderness that held secrets best left undisturbed. In the days that followed, we left Fort Hancock with a newfound respect for the forest and its guardians. The experience had bonded us in ways we couldn't have imagined, a reminder of the thin line between human curiosity and nature's wrath. But sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees and the moonlight dances on the lake surface, I catch a glimpse of glowing eyes watching from the shadows, a silent reminder that the creature still roams Fort Hancock, protecting its realm from those who dare to trespass. And so, the legend lives on, a tale of respect, fear, and the enduring mystery of the shadows that dwell within the heart of the wilderness. Story number 4. Whispers of Fort Stanton. The vast expanse of the New Mexico desert stretches endlessly, a sea of sand and scrub under the relentless sun. Nestled within this barren landscape lies Fort Stanton, a relic of a tumultuous past. Once a bustling military hospital and a grim prison for war captives, the fort has long been abandoned, its silent walls now serving as a magnet for urban explorers and thrill seekers. My name is Jake Thompson, and along with my girlfriend, Emily, I was drawn to the fort by stories of its haunted history and the supernatural phenomena that locals whisper about in hushed tones. Emily and I had always been fascinated by urban exploration, the thrill of discovering forgotten places, uncovering hidden secrets, and capturing the eerie beauty of decay through our cameras. Fort Stanton was the perfect destination for our next adventure. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and a sense of curiosity that bordered on obsession, we set out on a crisp autumn afternoon, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. As we approached the fortified entrance, the imposing structure loomed before us, its stone walls weathered by time and the harsh desert climate. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. We parked our car at the edge of the property, the gravel crunching beneath our boots as we made our way towards the main gate. "Can you believe this place?" Emily asked, her eyes wide with excitement and a hint of apprehension. "It's like stepping back in time." I nodded, a smile playing on my lips. "Yeah, it's incredible. Just imagine the stories these walls could tell." Pushing open the heavy iron gates, we entered the compound, the cold evening air brushing against our skin. The fort was a sprawling complex of buildings, each one more dilapidated than the last. Vines snaked up the sides of the stone structures, and broken windows stared blankly into the night. Our footsteps echoed through the deserted halls as we ventured deeper into the heart of Fort Stanton. We decided to start our exploration in what was once the main hospital building. The entrance hall was grand yet eerie, with high ceilings and ornate archways that had long lost their splendor. Dust motes danced in the beams of our flashlights, adding to the otherworldly atmosphere. As we moved through the corridors, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant dripping of water and the occasional scurrying of a desert creature seeking refuge. "Let's check out the patient wards," I suggested, pointing to a hallway that led to a series of rooms once used to treat wounded soldiers and prisoners. Emily nodded, her camera already capturing the haunting beauty of the decaying environment. As we entered one of the patient rooms, the air grew noticeably colder, a stark contrast to the warm desert breeze outside. The room was sparsely furnished, with a single hospital bed dominating the space. The mattress was stained and torn, the leather straps that once secured patients now ripped and frayed. On the wall opposite the bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, handprints smeared in what looked like dried blood, still vivid against the peeling paint. "Jake, look at this," Emily whispered, her voice trembling slightly as she pointed to the gruesome markings. "It's like someone tried to escape." I approached the wall, my flashlight beam flickering over the handprints. "This is messed up. Whoever did this was in a lot of pain." As we stood there, taking in the horrifying scene, a faint whisper echoed through the room, barely audible but unmistakably present. "Don't let us stay." We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. The voice seemed to come from all around us, yet no one was there. I glanced at Emily, who was staring wide-eyed into the darkness. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, my voice shaky. "We should keep moving." Deciding not to let our fear get the better of us, we pressed forward, exploring the rest of the hospital. Each room we entered held its own set of disturbing sights, rusted medical equipment, tattered curtains fluttering in the drafts, and remnants of a time long past. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent, following us from room to room. We eventually found ourselves in the administration office, a room that had likely been used for record-keeping and coordination during the fort's operational days. The large wooden desk was cluttered with decaying papers and broken pens, the remnants of frantic activity left behind by those who once worked here. As we examined the room, another voice pierced through the silence, this one more desperate and pleading. "Help us!" Emily grabbed my arm, her knuckles white with fear. "Jake, I think we should go. This place isn't safe." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "You're right. Let's head back." As we made our way towards the exit, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The whispers and pleas echoed louder, making it feel as though the very walls were closing in on us. We quickened our pace, the weight of unseen eyes bearing down on us, urging us to leave. Just as we reached the main entrance, a sudden gust of wind howled through the fort, slamming the doors shut with a deafening crash. The sound reverberated through the compound, and we found ourselves trapped inside, the whispers transforming into anguished cries. "Don't let us stay," the voices moaned in unison, the desperation palpable in the air. Panic surged through me as I realized we were not going to escape so easily. "We need to find another way out," I whispered to Emily, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. "Over there," she pointed to a window partially obscured by debris. "Maybe we can break it open." We rushed towards the window, but as we approached, the temperature dropped further, the cold seeping into our bones. The whispers turned into wails, the sounds of torment and anguish filling the room. I reached out to push the window, but it wouldn't budge, the glass cold and unyielding against my touch. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as all the lights went out, leaving us in pitch blackness. The howling winds and the anguished cries intensified, the walls pulsating with an unseen energy. In the darkness, I felt a presence behind me, a weight pressing down on my shoulders. "Jake!" A voice called out, filled with sorrow and desperation. I turned around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive darkness and the sounds of the tormented spirits. "Emily, something's wrong," I whispered, gripping her hand tightly. "We need to stay calm." But the whispers continued, growing louder and more frantic, the spirits' pleas echoing in our minds. "Don't let us stay, help us." Desperation overcame me as I searched for a way to escape, but the fort seemed to shift and change around us, the corridors elongating and twisting into impossible shapes. We stumbled through the maze-like structure, the voices following us, a constant reminder of the souls trapped within these walls. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a faint light appeared at the end of a corridor, a beacon in the darkness. With renewed determination, we sprinted towards it, the whispers fading slightly as we moved closer to our goal. The light led us to an old, abandoned office building within the fort, its entrance seemingly untouched by time. Inside, the light was brighter, emanating from a large stained glass window that bathed the room in colorful hues. The atmosphere here was different, less oppressive, more serene. The whispers were now soft, almost like distant memories, as if the spirits were no longer desperate but simply existing in a state of quiet sorrow. "We made it," I said, breathing a sigh of relief. "We need to find a way out from here." Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the room for an exit. As we approached the window, the light grew brighter, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me, the fear and anxiety of the past moments melting away. Just as we were about to reach the window, the door to the office slammed shut, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. "Don't let us stay." We turned to see the ghostly figures of soldiers and prisoners standing behind us, their eyes hollow and their expressions filled with anguish. The spirits formed a circle around us, their presence overwhelming and suffocating. "Please," one of the spirits whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "Remember us." I took a deep breath, realizing that the spirits were not malevolent but seeking recognition and remembrance for their suffering. "We will remember you," I promised, my voice steady despite the fear that still lingered. As I spoke, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air like mist. The oppressive weight lifted, and the room returned to its peaceful state. The door to the office opened once more, revealing the path to the outside world. "We have to leave," I urged Emily, pulling her towards the door. "Now." We rushed out of the office, the whispers silencing behind us, replaced by the gentle sounds of the desert night. As we made our way back to the entrance of Fort Stanton, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the deserted grounds. The gate swung open effortlessly, the wind no longer howling with the voices of the trapped spirits. We didn't look back as we hurried towards our car, the weight of the night's events settling heavily on our shoulders. Driving away from Fort Stanton, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the spirits watching us. But there was nothing, only the peaceful expanse of the desert, bathed in the soft light of morning. Emily reached over, squeezing my hand. And I realized that our ordeal had brought us closer together, our bond strengthened by the shared terror and the haunting memories of the night. In the days that followed, we couldn't stop thinking about Fort Stanton and the spirits we had encountered. The experience left an indelible mark on our lives, a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and respect, and the importance of honoring the past. We decided to turn our footage and stories into a documentary, hoping to shed light on the forgotten souls of Fort Stanton and ensure that their stories were never forgotten. As I sat in my editing room, piecing together the footage and narrating our journey, I couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. The whispers of Fort Stanton were not just ghostly tales, but echoes of real suffering and loss. By sharing their stories, we were giving voice to the voiceless, helping them find peace through remembrance. The documentary, titled Whispers of Fort Stanton, resonated with audiences, sparking conversations about the haunted histories of abandoned places and the spirits that linger within them. People were moved by our story, sharing their own experiences and adding their voices to the collective memory of Fort Stanton. One evening, as I watched the final cut of the documentary, a familiar feeling of unease settled over me. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, merging with the memories of that night. I glanced at the screen, watching the last moments of our escape, and felt a presence behind me. "Jake!" A soft whisper echoed in the room, the voice filled with sorrow and longing. I turned around slowly, my heart racing, only to find the room empty once more. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, but there was no harm intended, only a lingering reminder of the spirit's presence and their eternal plea to be remembered. In the years that followed, Fort Stanton remained a place of fascination and fear, its haunted reputation growing with each passing story. Emily and I continued our work, documenting haunted sites and giving voice to the forgotten souls trapped within. But the memory of Fort Stanton stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the night we encountered the whispers and the ghosts that still roamed the abandoned fort. Sometimes, when the desert winds blow and the moon casts long shadows across the landscape, I can still hear the faint whispers of Fort Stanton, calling out from the past. It's a reminder that some places hold secrets too powerful to remain hidden, their stories forever entwined with the land and the spirits that seek peace through remembrance. And so, the whispers of Fort Stanton continue to echo through the silent halls of the abandoned fort, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the restless spirits that yearn to be remembered. Story number 5. The Silent Sentinel of Fort Wardens. The mist hung low over the Puget Sound, shrouding Fort Wardens in an ethereal veil that seemed to blur the line between reality and nightmare. My name is Alex Turner, and what was supposed to be a memorable winter camping trip with my high school friends quickly devolved into an ordeal that left scars deeper than the frozen ground beneath our tents. Fort Wardens, with its rugged coastline and imposing military architecture, had always held a certain allure for us. The stories of haunted soldiers and restless spirits were the perfect bait for our teenage imaginations. As history enthusiasts, we were fascinated by the fort's past, its role in coastal defense during both world wars, and the countless lives lost within its fortified walls. But nothing could have prepared us for the horrors we were about to encounter. It was the first week of December when we arrived at the fort, our cars crunching over the snow-covered gravel roads that led to the main gate. The air was crisp, the scent of pine mingling with the salty tang of the sea. We set up our camp near one of the old barracks, the wooden structures standing stoic against the winter elements. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the snow. "Man, this place is straight out of a ghost story," Jake remarked, his breath visible in the cold air as he adjusted his backpack. "Yeah, imagine living here back in the day," I replied, trying to mask the unease that had settled in my stomach. As night fell, we gathered around a small fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing tales of the fort's haunted history. The older students recounted stories of spectral soldiers marching through the night and ghostly apparitions seen from the towers. Laughter and nervous chuckles filled the air, but an unspoken tension lingered, a reminder that we were trespassing on hallowed ground. Around midnight, as the wind howled through the remnants of the fort, we decided to explore the old watchtower, a central feature of Fort Wardens' defenses. Armed with flashlights and fueled by a mix of fear and excitement, we made our way through the desolate halls, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the cold, stone walls. "Stay close," I warned, my voice barely steady as we ascended the winding staircase to the top of the tower. The higher we climbed, the more the air seemed to grow colder, the darkness pressing in around us. Reaching the observation deck, we were greeted by a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape, the snow-covered terrain stretching endlessly in every direction. The moon hung high, its pale light reflecting off the water and casting ghostly patterns on the ground. "Let's set up here," Sarah suggested, pulling out her camera. "This place is perfect for some spooky shots." As we arranged our equipment, a sudden chill swept through the room and the temperature dropped sharply. The air felt heavy, charged with an unexplainable energy. We exchanged uneasy glances, the hairs on the back of our necks standing on end. "Did you guys feel that?" Mike asked, his voice wavering. Before anyone could respond, a distant clanging sound echoed through the tower, a metallic noise that seemed out of place in the otherwise silent night. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as if something, or someone, was moving within the fort's walls. "Probably just the wind," Jake suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. But the sound persisted, transforming into what could only be described as footsteps, steady, deliberate, and hauntingly familiar. We turned towards the source, our flashlights darting through the darkness, trying to pierce the thick shadows that enveloped us. "Who's there?" I called out, my heart pounding in my chest. Silence followed my question, the only sound the relentless wind outside. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Just as we were about to dismiss it as another trick of our minds, a figure materialized at the far end of the observation deck. It was a man, dressed in a uniform that looked strikingly like that of a World War II soldier. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, and his presence exuded a sorrowful menace. He stood motionless, staring at us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Leave now," he whispered, his voice carrying a weight of despair. "Don't let us stay." Before anyone could react, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread that clung to us like the winter frost. We stood there, breathless and shaken, trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. "Okay, that's enough ghost hunting for one night," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Let's get back to the tents." We hurried down the stairs, the memory of the spectral soldier burning into our minds. As we made our way back to the camp, the wind seemed to carry faint whispers, soft pleas that echoed through the empty halls of the fort. The next morning, the fort was cloaked in a thick blanket of snow, the previous night's encounter feeling like a bad dream. Determined to understand what we had seen, we decided to delve deeper into the fort's history, visiting the small library housed within one of the barracks. The librarian, an elderly man with a stoic demeanor, listened patiently as we recounted our experience. "Fort Wardens has a long history of tragic events," he began, his voice steady. "During World War II, there were numerous casualties, both soldiers and prisoners of war. Some say their spirits never left, forever bound to the fort by their unfinished business." He handed us an old, leather-bound journal, the pages yellowed with age. This belonged to Captain Henry Adams, one of the fort's commanding officers. It details the hardships and losses endured by his men. Maybe it can shed some light on what you encountered. We spent the rest of the day poring over the journal, the words of Captain Adams painting a grim picture of life within Fort Wardens. The entries spoke of relentless training, harsh winters, and the constant fear of enemy attacks. But it was the final entries that sent a chill down our spines, descriptions of soldiers vanishing without a trace, their bodies never found despite exhaustive searches. The last entry mentions a watcher who roams the fort, ensuring no one disturbs the peace of the fallen, Sarah read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, armed with the knowledge from the journal, we felt a renewed sense of purpose. We wanted to communicate with the spirits, to give them a voice and perhaps find a way to help them find peace. Gathering our courage, we decided to return to the watchtower, the site of our initial encounter. As we ascended the staircase once more, the air grew colder, the oppressive silence more pronounced. Reaching the observation deck, we set up our equipment, this time with the intent of documenting any further supernatural activity. "Let's start recording," I instructed, activating the camera. "Maybe we can capture some evidence." We waited in tense anticipation, the minutes stretching into hours as the night deepened. The same metallic clanging echoed through the tower, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My heart raced as the figure of the spectral soldier reappeared, his eyes fixed on us with a sorrowful plea. "Help us," he whispered, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Remember our sacrifice." I took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Captain Adams, we want to help. Tell us what we need to do." The figure hesitated, his form wavering like a flickering flame. You must honor our memory. Preserve our stories. Ensure that our sacrifices are never forgotten. Before we could respond, the atmosphere shifted, the cold lifting as if the fort itself was acknowledging our presence. The spectral soldier gave a faint nod before fading into the night, leaving behind a sense of closure that had eluded him for so long. We spent the remainder of our time at Fort Wardens honoring the fallen, documenting their stories, and ensuring that their memories would be preserved for future generations. The whispers and apparitions became less frequent, the spirits seemingly at peace now that their stories were being told. As we packed up to leave, the fort felt different, less foreboding, more respectful of the past that had shaped it. The lessons we learned from Captain Adams and the spirits of Fort Wardens stayed with us, a reminder of the importance of remembering and honoring those who had sacrificed so much. Driving away from Fort Wardens, the morning sun breaking through the winter clouds, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The fort stood silent and serene, the shadows of its haunted past now part of its enduring legacy. Years later, I still think back to that winter night, the spectral soldier's plea echoing in my mind. Fort Wardens remains a place of mystery and history, a silent sentinel guarding the stories of the past. And whenever I visit, I carry with me the memories of that night, a testament to the enduring power of remembrance and the ghosts that watch over the forgotten corners of our history. But sometimes, when the wind whispers through the empty halls and the moon casts long shadows over the snow-covered grounds, I swear I can still hear the faint whispers of Fort Wardens, reminding us all to remember and honor the fallen. Story number 6. Echoes of the Dead Land. The scorching summer sun cast long shadows over the desolate expanse of Fort D.A. Russell, a relic of Wyoming's tumultuous past. My name is Ethan Mitchell, and what began as a simple quest for captivating photographs soon unraveled into a nightmarish ordeal that blurred the lines between reality and the supernatural. Fort D.A. Russell, once a formidable cavalry base, now stood abandoned, its weathered stone structures and overgrown grounds whispering tales of forgotten soldiers and lingering spirits. Locals referred to it as the Dead Land, a moniker earned from the inexplicable phenomena that plagued the area long after its abandonment. As an amateur photographer with a penchant for urban exploration, I was drawn to Fort D.A. Russell by the promise of eerie beauty and the allure of capturing the unseen. Armed with my trusty DSLR, a sturdy tripod, and an insatiable curiosity, I embarked on a journey to document the fort's haunting ruins. Little did I know, the fort held secrets far darker than I could have ever imagined. The drive from Casper to Fort D.A. Russell was uneventful, the vast Wyoming landscape stretching endlessly under a cloudless sky. Upon arrival, the fort loomed ahead, its imposing walls and dilapidated buildings standing as silent sentinels against the encroaching wilderness. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the faint hint of decay, a reminder of the years of neglect that had left their mark on the once majestic fortress. I set up my camp near the main entrance, the cold desert breeze a stark contrast to the heat of the day. As twilight descended, I felt a palpable shift in the atmosphere, the shadows deepening and the fort seeming to come alive with whispered echoes of the past. Undeterred, I began my exploration, the thrill of discovery fueling my steps as I ventured into the heart of the fort. The first few hours were nothing short of mesmerizing. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the stone walls, highlighting the intricate carvings and faded insignias that adorned the buildings. I wandered through the barracks, the officers' quarters, and the mess halls, each room telling its own story of camaraderie, loss, and resilience. My camera captured the haunting beauty of the fort, each click of the shutter preserving a moment frozen in time. As night fully enveloped the fort, I made my way to an old warehouse that had once served as a storage facility for supplies and equipment. The building stood isolated from the main structures, its large doors boarded up and windows shattered, allowing the moonlight to spill into the darkness within. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped inside, the temperature dropping dramatically despite the summer night outside. With my flashlight in hand, I navigated the cluttered interior, the beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The walls were adorned with graffiti, hastily scrawled messages from previous explorers who had dared to venture into the heart of the fort. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, an unsettling silence settled over me, broken only by the distant howling of a lone coyote and the soft rustling of debris caught in the drafts. I found an old hospital bed in the center of the room, its frame rusty and the mattress torn and stained. The sight was both eerie and poignant, a stark reminder of the lives once touched by the fort's operations. As I set up my cameras to capture the haunting scene, I felt an inexplicable coldness envelop me, the air thick with an unseen presence. Just a chill, I muttered to myself, shaking off the unease and focusing on framing the perfect shot. I adjusted the settings on my camera, capturing the desolate beauty of the abandoned hospital room. Satisfied with the image, I decided to take a short break, settling into a corner with my gear, ready to review the photos later. But as I sat there, the oppressive silence was shattered by the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the warehouse. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to hear the source of the noise. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, and I realized with mounting fear that they were approaching me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering between bravery and terror. The footsteps halted, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft whisper seemed to brush against my ear, sending chills down my spine. "Don't forget us." I swung my flashlight towards the source of the voice, but there was nothing, only the vast emptiness of the warehouse and the shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was experiencing. It couldn't be real, I told myself. Just the wind, or maybe an animal passing by. But the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of sorrow and desperation. "Don't forget us." Panic surged through me as I grabbed my camera, hoping to capture evidence of whatever was haunting the fort. As I lifted the lens to my eye, the flash went off, illuminating the darkness in a blinding burst of light. I recoiled, covering my eyes, and when I looked back, I saw it, a faint, ghostly figure standing in the corner of the room. The apparition was gaunt and emaciated, dressed in a tattered cavalry uniform that once signified strength and honor. Its eyes, hollow and sorrowful, stared directly at me, the pain and anguish within them palpable. The figure seemed to hover in the air, its presence both terrifying and tragic. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to process the sight before me. I'm sorry, I stammered, my voice barely audible. I didn't mean to intrude. The ghostly figure tilted its head, as if trying to understand my words, before slowly dissipating into the shadows, leaving me alone in the warehouse once more. My heart raced as I tried to steady my breathing, the reality of what I had just witnessed sinking in. Determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting, I delved into the history of Fort D.A. Russell, visiting the local library and speaking with elderly residents who had first-hand knowledge of the fort's dark past. What I discovered was a harrowing tale of war, suffering, and unfulfilled promises. The fort had been a place of refuge and pain, where soldiers fought bravely and prisoners endured unimaginable horrors. Many had lost their lives within its walls, their spirits now trapped, unable to find peace. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a deep sense of responsibility to honor their memories and help them find the closure they so desperately sought. I returned to the fort with a renewed purpose, determined to communicate with the spirits and document their stories. Each night, I set up my camera in different parts of the fort, hoping to capture more evidence of the supernatural activity that plagued the area. One evening, as I was exploring an old mess hall, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. This time, I was prepared. I stood my ground, my camera ready to capture whatever apparition dared to appear. The footsteps grew louder, and I felt the temperature drop once more, the air thick with an unseen presence. "Remember us," the voice whispered, more urgent than before. I raised my camera, the flash illuminating the room, and saw not just one, but multiple ghostly figures emerging from the shadows. Their eyes glowed with a sorrowful light, and their expressions were a mixture of pain and longing. They moved towards me, their movements slow and deliberate, as if reliving their final moments within the fort. "I understand," I said softly, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "I will remember your stories. I will honor your memories." The spirits paused, their eyes searching mine for the truth in my words. A sense of peace began to emanate from them, the oppressive weight of their sorrow lifting as they acknowledged my intentions. One by one, the apparitions faded into the night, their presence replaced by a serene calm that settled over the fort. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and relief. The spirits of Fort D.A. Russell had been acknowledged, their stories preserved through my lens. I packed up my gear, The haunting whispers now a distant memory, replaced by the gentle sounds of the awakening desert. Driving away from the fort, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, seeing the silent silhouette of Fort D.A. Russell standing against the morning light. I knew that the stories of the dead land would continue to draw curious souls, but I also knew that with respect and remembrance, the restless spirits could finally find the peace they had long been denied. Years have passed since that transformative winter, and my photographs of Fort D.A. Russell have been featured in exhibitions and publications, each image a testament to the fort's haunted legacy. The experiences I endured there remain etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. Sometimes, when the desert winds blow and the sun sets in a blaze of crimson and gold, I find myself drawn back to those haunting images, the echoes of Fort D.A. Russell whispering through the corridors of my mind. It's a haunting yet beautiful reminder that some places hold secrets that transcend time, their stories forever intertwined with the spirits that guard them. And so, the legend of the dead land at Fort D.A. Russell lives on, a tale of courage, remembrance, and the enduring power of memory to bridge the gap between the living and the restless souls that dwell in the shadows.